Hey guys, Josh Linville here. I'm the Vice President of the Fertilizer Division for StoneX Financial Inc. FCM Division. For those that you may not know me, this is June 25th, 2024. Keeping on this weekly YouTube fertilizer video pattern they've got me on. And there's been quite a few things going on in the marketplace. I can tell you, Northwest Missouri crops are looking absolutely phenomenal. Ran up to the family farm on Sunday, got to go across a lot of fields. Everything's looking absolutely gorgeous, which means we're on storm alert. I know they're talking some storms coming from the Northwest, wind, hail, stuff like that. Hopefully it doesn't happen. We can keep raising this good crop, but watching that fairly closely this evening. A lot of issues going on with the river systems out there. A lot of high waters to the north. A lot of starting, at least from our standpoint, a lot of nerves starting to grow that maybe the barge logistics, maybe rail logistics will start to be impacted. So, going to need to watch all these sorts of things. And of course, a few things going on with the actual markets. And I'll try to get another video out there to talk about those things. But on this one, I wanted to talk about something a little bit different. If you have seen me give a presentation, seen a talk, seen me on the radio, or I'm sorry, on TV, heard me on the radio, we spend a lot of time talking about this ratio perspective. And all this is, it's nothing fancy. We're not trying to act like it's some grand thing that is so hard to understand. It's merely looking at the market from a input output standpoint. It's how many bushels of grain does it take to pay for a ton of fertilizer? And I get a lot of folks that ask, why? Why would you do that? And ultimately, it comes down to personally, and hopefully a lot of you guys are, and you can do a lot better than I can, but I'm not smart enough to sit there and figure out when the high of the grain markets are. I'm not smart enough to figure out when the lows of the fertilizer markets are. So if we can't on a regular basis figure either one of those out, in which if you can, why are we messing with anything else? We can make a lot more money trading the markets. But if we can't regularly figure that out, why do we try to market that way? Why are we always trying to sell our grain in a way that we think we're going to hold out? We're going to find that magic highest number out there. Or why do we hold off on the fertilizer, hoping for that absolute lowest number? Ultimately speaking, like I said, it's a little bit like manufacturing. It's inputs and outputs. And the grand question for that we always ask during grower meetings and things like that is, would you rather spend more or less bushels per ton of fertilizer that you use? And a lot of the times we'll ask this question and we get a lot of blank stares, or people sit there and say, well, okay, it's a trick question. What's the actual answer? There is no trick question. Now, this graph I'm showing you right now, this is looking at that NOLA DAP, New Orleans, Louisiana DAP on a barge level versus new crop corn. So, from my perspective, everything that is kind of purchased after June 1st on DAP is being used to grow the next year's crop because you're going to put it on either the fall or the spring. That next year's crop is going to do it. So, right now, all the phosphate that's trading, we're looking at it versus the December 25 corn price. That's our own personal way. There's people who push back and say, no, I'm going to buy based on what December 24 is. I'm going to do it basis cash. It doesn't matter. Whatever works for you. I'm not here to sit there and tell you how you should or shouldn't be looking at it. That's just the way that we look at it, how I look at it. But just for this graph's sake, right now, any of the numbers you're looking at from here forward, we're looking at December 25 corn. And I want you to look at this graph and I want you to study it real quick. You don't see any prices. You don't see a price of phosphate. You do not see a price of corn. You see nothing like that. Those numbers on the left are merely indicating how many bushels of corn it takes to pay for a ton of DAP week after week after week. And it looks at all the years going back to 2018. We've got this data that goes all the way back to like 2005 or earlier, I believe it is. But just to keep it simple, kept it at 2018. And you look at it. And the question is, okay, in this case, guys, would you rather be spending 60, which is the lowest number we saw there towards the tail end of 2019, early 2020, bushels to pay for 1 ton of DAP, or 150, which is what we saw in 2022? And okay, let's get into some numbers. You may automatically think, well, these high numbers, this highest number right here in 2022, boy, that must have been a terrible, horrible corn price. And this one down here must have been, it must have been really bad. But guys, back here, the worst value, the worst ratio that we have seen since 2018, corn price is about $8 a bushel. Go down here, the best value between the phosphate and the corn market, corn was only $3.75 to $4. That kind of goes against our rational thinking. Top left, corn was $8. You're spending about 150 bushels of corn for every ton of DAP they used. And why is that? Because phosphate was sky high. Phosphate in the Gulf of Mexico was like $1,000 a ton at this point. Yeah, corn was $8. And from an overall farm perspective, $8 corn is phenomenal. I'm not saying that it's not. But guys, when we look at the individual relationship between phosphate and corn, that was the absolute worst time to lock anything up. And down here, you sitting there saying, well, I don't want to do anything at 4. I sure don't want to see anything with a 3 in front of it. Well, guys, $4 corn was some of the best values we've seen in half a decade, almost a decade. Like I said, at this point, this is why we look at this. It's trying to figure out what is the highest value and what's the lowest value. What's the best number of bushels? What's the worst number of bushels? And when you start to look at it week after week after week and year after year, you start to see seasonal patterns and you start to figure out, well, everything in this circle is kind of that bottom 25% going back to 2018. And this is my perspective. And I'm not sitting there telling anybody what they should or shouldn't be doing. But whenever we get down to these type of levels, get down to this kind of a range, not only should we be locking up the value, we ought to be considering building the soil pattern, build the soil levels. It's a phenomenal value that is historically very, very good. We should be adding extra phosphate if the soil can hold it and we don't lose it anywhere. That's conversation we need to have with our retailer, our agronomist. But if you've got that capability, these are the times when we ought to be growing and building that soil level. On the flip side, everything on the top side of this graph is basically sitting there saying we ought to be trying to tap into some of those soil reserves. If we can scale back some of our application without impacting any of our overall yields, that's what we ought to be doing. Lock it up here, pull it out here. It's an insurance play. It's putting extra in when the value is there and pulling it out when it's not. And here's where those numbers come from. This is looking at all those data points going back to 2018. And basically these lines, these two horizontal lines that you're looking at, these are the middle 50% of the values going back to 2018. And everything on this lowest side is a phenomenally good value to you as the farmer. And everything up here is very, very bad. The unfortunate part is Gulf of Mexico, a barge of DAP right now is costing about $550, $547 per ton for a barge. And as of today, this is Tuesday, December 25 corn closed at 461. It actually had to rally to get to 461. That ratio is sitting between 118, 119. Guys, that's where that number is sitting right there. You are sitting right here. So last summer, this ratio dipped down to 80. Had we locked this up and put these tons in the soil and had that profile raised, well, right now, as we're sitting on these highest end, we could have been using some of that insurance play to our benefit. And again, like I said, we need to have that local conversation to make sure you can be done. But this is why we talk about it the way that we do. You can go from very, very good to very, very bad in a very short amount of time. And like I said, ultimately for me, farming is a lot like manufacturing. It's just inputs and outputs. And I'm not going to sit here and say farming isn't just this. Farming is so much more. I understand it. I get it. I grew up on a farm. My dad would beat the crap out of me if I told him that's all that he was. That's not the case. But when it comes to marketing, it's inputs and it's outputs. So if that's the case, we ought to be shying away when that value is extremely high, and we ought to be getting excited when the value is low. Now, marketing ahead, it does have its risk, and we have to keep those in mind. Nothing's ever guaranteed. We always want to keep in the back of our mind that, hey, if I market grain, next year's grain, December 25 corn, am I going to raise it? Is the weather going to allow it? How's the insurance play out? A lot of those things have to come into play. So please don't take this at face value. You've got to take anything I ever say to your local level and say, okay, does this make sense for me? Does this make sense for my operation? Guys, I'm not going to be there if the bank comes to call and says, hey, we've got an issue and we need to talk about it. That's not what we're trying to get into, but it's something that we do need to keep in the back of our mind. Also, the graphs that I typically use when I'm showing them on Twitter or these videos or any place like that, that is looking at it from a very high level. In this case, this graph I was just showing you, that is Chicago corn. You are not getting Chicago corn pricing. You're getting something less of basis, more than likely. NOLA, you are not getting NOLA pricing. You are getting a local market, which is basis on top of NOLA. We need to be having these conversations with our local retailer. And it is nothing more than looking at it weekly, monthly, whatever the data they have, and just looking at the fertilizer price divided by the grain price. It's that simple. but that local relationship, that local graph, those local values are going to mean so much more to your operation. So, guys, like I said, the bulk of this market, this video was just kind of give you a little bit of the concept of why we talk about this. It's the phosphate situation has been a fascinating study. The last year, we've gone from very good to very bad in just a short amount of time. And frankly, just because we're in a high end, it doesn't mean it's going to get better. There's a lot of things that are pointing to phosphate prices actually staying high or pushing higher. And right now, you talk to people at the grain markets, they're like, dude, it's not getting any better anytime soon. There's a phenomenal crop out there. It can get worse. Trust me. We are in ag. We know it can always get worse. So do keep that in the back of your mind. But it's just another tool in your toolbox to use out there. And frankly, we're trying to eke out every single dollar we possibly can. The market is never doing us any favors. We got to pick up these opportunities when they're sitting in front of us. So that's it. I'll stop berating you guys on this thing. Ultimately speaking, it does take a little bit of education. I'd love to sit here and act like I'm such a great salesman. I've talked my whole family into it. I know my dad's still kind of like, yeah, but so yeah, dad, I'm calling you out on a YouTube video. So you're famous. But no, it takes a bit of time. It's a different approach to it, but it's something we do believe in. If you've got questions, like I said, go to our website, stonex.com. A lot of good resources there. Still putting stuff out on Twitter all the time. My handle's at jlinvillefert. If you get a chance and you're interested, this is always going to be kind of topical. We're going to do a deep dive into each one of the markets on the farmer newsletter. You can Google that. Just do StoneX Farmer Fertilizer Newsletter. I know I'm actually going ahead and working on the July edition now. I've got everything set up. I'm getting the prices and things and the talking points. That will go out this Friday. So if you're interested, go there, register, Google it, find it. Otherwise, you need anything, reach out. Please let us know. And good luck out there, guys. Hope everything's going well.